All right. Good afternoon to everybody that is joining today, and thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy fall schedule today to talk about a very, very important topic, New York City elections and how it might impact the New York City real estate market. We're going to get started momentarily. I just want to take a moment to explain, guys, what we're going to do here. We got a little format here, and then I'll go ahead and introduce the panelists, the esteemed panelists that we got, the great minds that we got. We're going to cut this in half, guys. We're going to try to keep this to an hour. We're going to cut it in half. The first 30 minutes are going to be preset questions that myself and the panelists have come up with. So that's going to touch on a whole bunch of areas. And then the second half is going to be speed round of the questions that you guys submitted when you registered for this webinar. We went into ChatGPT and organized that whole thing, and we got a list of questions, so there's no overlap. Well, try not to overlap. But the goal here, guys, the goal here is not to have a political fight. It's not the goal here. We're trying to keep a political conversation apolitical. We're trying to have a conversation of best practices and how do you deal with your clients and how do you navigate this through discussions with clients. And that's the goal of this thing. Okay. So that's how I'm going to run it. Okay. Hopefully it's all very, very cordial and very calm, and we're going to get right into it. Okay, guys. Thank you. First off, thank you guys for joining us today. I got three great minds. I got Teresa Stephenson. Thank you for being here, president of Platinum Properties. I got Jared Antin. We love Jared, executive director at Brown Harris Stevens. And we got Jason Haber, broker extraordinaire. And he is our UrbanDigs political correspondent. Basically, over at Compass. Thank you so much. Thank you guys, and great minds, tough conversation. Jason, I want to start with you. I want to set the stage, power and process. Before we go into any market impacts, can you just let us know the mechanics of the election? Who's on the ballot? Can you vote early? Just the basic stuff before we get going.
Yeah, sure. And just by background, Noah, because a lot of our colleagues may not be familiar, I've been involved in Democratic politics in New York City for now almost 25 years, and I've held numerous elected positions within the party locally. So these mayoral elections are, this is one like none other we've had before, but I've been around on these election cycles, and so the things I speak about, I speak not just as a broker, as someone in the real estate industry, but someone with real practical experience in local New York City government, and which I served in government for a number of years before in real estate and also just in politics, which I've been involved in for a long time. So in this election, some of you may have gotten an early ballot already, so you may have already voted. For those who haven't, there are actually 9 names on the ballot. 9. 2 of the 9 have since dropped out, but because of a quirk in the New York state election law, the names cannot be removed from the ballot. So only 7 active candidates. Of those, obviously, the big 3, Zohran Mamdani being the Democratic nominee, Curtis Lee, the Republican nominee, and Andrew Cuomo, who's running on an independent line that he created. On top of the candidate choices, there are really important ballot questions that are on this ballot, particularly questions 2 through 5, which relate to expansion of affordability and fast tracking the ULERT process. We'll get into this a little later, but just to preview our conversation, it's not just the candidates on the ballot that I think is important for us in the real estate industry to know about, but also the ballot propositions. Most specifically 2 through 5, 2 through 4 being the ones that the city council, some members of the city council are fighting us on. So those will be important to talk about. And this is an election like no other. Usually in New York, the general the November election is a sleepy affair. It's anything but in this election. And stay tuned tonight because at 7 p.m. is the first mayoral debate of the general election. Again, in a little quirk, only the first hour is televised. So it's a 2-hour debate, but you only get to see the first hour on TV. The second hour is streamed only. It's a whole reason why, which I can explain another time. But if you want to watch it online, you can do so on Politico's website and NBC4. Otherwise, the first hour, 7 to 8, will only be on television. So I'd encourage folks to watch the debate tonight.
Okay, good stuff. Jared, Teresa, anything you want to add in terms of structure? Okay, you good, Jared?
Well, I would just chime in and say I think that's the most important thing is we need to make sure that there is that get out to vote initiative because as Jason said, typically when you get to the general election, people just assume, well, it's already a sure thing and someone else will vote for me, and that can't stand this year. No matter
Right.
who you like
Yeah.
and who you don't like, you got to vote for yourself.
So in a typical presidential election, like last November for presidential election, 2.7 million people voted in the general, and that obviously went very heavily for Kamala Harris. This turnout will be significantly less. Historically, if you look at the last three cycles, we would do around 1.5 million. Obviously, the closer you get to 2 million plus votes in a general, it would make it a much more competitive race. Um, there's no indication that this would be over 2 million. The record, I think, is around 2 million. We did that in 1989 and then 1993. That was when Giuliani faced off against David Dinkins twice, first losing, then winning. So there is a precedent for having a higher turnout in contested general elections in New York City. But even in a contested election, it's just a different electoral cohort. There are some people who, for them, voting is a quadrennial exercise. So they only do it once every 4 years. The goal is to drive up turnout on this one as high as possible, hopefully crossing the 2 million voter threshold, although that may be a reach. We'll see.
Quadrennial. That's a good word. What's the over under on Poly Market? Is there an over under on Poly? I know you can.
So I would say this. I want to be clear about Polymarket. Polymarket is horrific when it comes to predicting local election outcomes. You can't bet Polymarket in the US. If so, I would have made a fortune on betting Polymarket because they're so wrong so often. I'll just give you a quick example. You can look back, pull it up right now. 30 days out of the primary, Zoran Mamdani was at 4% on Polymarket, and Andrew Cuomo was at 88%. Now,
flipped.
The a little esoteric, but the Emerson poll that came out on May 30th, which clearly showed the Mamdani rise, was not reflected in Polymarket, and anyone could have made up that delta very nicely. Now, if you look at Polymarket right now, and I haven't seen the latest, I think Cuomo's around 17, 16%. I would tell people to ignore Polymarket. The only, polls are only a snapshot in time. The only way to look at a poll, by the way, is to look at the polls before and to track the trend. Otherwise, you're just looking at a moment in time and it only has some degree of value. And so the last poll showed Andrew Cuomo down 13. The polling before that had him down 22, 24. The critical poll will be after the debate. And is Cuomo down 8, 7, 9, or is he down 16 and the debate didn't make much of a difference? So these are the things to watch, is more the trend lines, and I tell everyone, you'll follow me on social media, I preach this often, walk away from Polymarket because it has a terrible prediction outcome. Only in the last hour after the votes have been cast, does it make its move? And it's no use then. So for right now, just look at that as for entertainment only, I would say.
Okay, that's good. I just have a feeling there's going to be a huge turnout, but let's see what happens. I think we're going to hit that 2 million or close to it. Jared, I want to pivot to you, please. Perception versus reality. There is a lot of myths out there. We've heard all the headlines. I want to know what's perception, what's reality when it comes to a Mamdani administration, and how that might actually impact New York City real estate.
Yeah, thank you, Noah. And Jason teed it up well in that, when something unexpected happens, the reaction or the response to it is equally and unexpected to some extent. So my overarching headline right now as it pertains to what does this mean if you're a owner or wannabe owner of New York City real estate, it's not as dire as people feared after that surprising primary win. Right? And one important thing to remember that in any election, people will generally start moving towards the center in order to win a general. And again, especially because of how crowded this field is, you have to be able to find that place. And we've already seen, Mamdani, again, like him or don't like him, factually and based upon observations, he's softened some of his rhetoric. He started reaching out beyond his core, supporters, and he's trying to meet with business leaders and cultural institutions and former city officials to be able to build that consensus that he knows if he's going to get anything that he wants to get done, he's going to need help. And that's probably the most important thing, is that to be able to govern in New York City, to be able to do anything that's on his agenda, you need that help, right? So I think the biggest thing is that, as real estate professionals, we need to make sure that we help keep the peace and the calm, and we ground our conversations rooted in fact and not hyperbole. We have all had clients that have called up and said, I'm putting my search on hold and I'm not going to buy, or I'm running for the hills, or this, that, and the other thing. And the reality is the data doesn't show that that's actually happening. If you look at September, there was a much smaller increase of new inventory year over year coming on the market above 4 million than there was under 4 million, right? There was a year over year slowdown in 4 million and plus contracts signed in September, but I'm going to take that with a little bit of grain of salt because we had an above average summer period for high-end deals. So at some point, they're going to need a little bit of a breather. So all in all, I think that the perception is vastly different from the reality. Campaign promises are not actual policy. And to be able to put that in place, it's going to rely on a lot of people doing things that they necessarily don't want to do. And we'll dive into more of that as we go.
Right. Thank you. And I'm going to put this not only to you, Jared, unless if you want to answer this, that's fine, but I also want to present this to Teresa or Jason, is how much real power does the mayor have when it comes to housing, zoning, and property taxes?
Well, I'll take the first part of that. I'll kick it to Teresa. I mean, let's take the rent guidelines board, right? So he wants to have a rent freeze. He can't just with the stroke of his pen freeze rents, right? He would need to appoint over the period of time as the current appointees on the rent guidelines board's term ends. And theoretically, if he appoints enough people that are quote unquote favorable to him, he may be able to get them to vote his way, but they're independent and there's no guarantee. And it'll take him about 2 years to be able to replace everyone on there. So I don't see a way that he gets in office if he wins, and then all of a sudden we have a rent freeze, right? So that's important, number one. Number two is, can he change property taxes and do some different stuff? That's probably the place where he has the most control, but there's some flow-on effects and some potential backlash, that can obviously come from that and how that could affect him doing some of the other things that he wants to do.
Okay. Teresa, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think so much of this to really go through with any power, a lot of people have to agree with him. A lot of this is going to go to Albany. So there's no way that he's coming in on day one and delivering all of these promises. I mean, there's a lot there. A lot would have to fall into place for a lot of these policies to go into place. I think the other thing, I love that Jason touched on the proposals that are on the ballot. And I think it's really interesting to go into that because I think that could talk about some huge impacts right away, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on here. And Jason, you probably know even more about the proposals than I do, but we're talking about taking a lot of power out of the hands of the city council, putting a lot of that power into the hands of the mayor. I think it's really interesting that Mamdani has not commented on whether or not he supports these proposals. In some ways, you'd expect him to come in on one side, but then as he's coming in as the mayor, maybe he would be interested in having some of that power. I'm very curious to see what he does there, and I think it's really important for all of us to get informed on those proposals beforehand, because that's somewhere where we have direct power over how much power the next mayor will or won't have.
Okay. Jason, could you go over these proposals? What is it, 2, 3, and 4? All right.
Yeah.
Each one, if you can, real quick, would be great.
So, and I'm just doing this. I don't have anything in front of me on this, but there's 3 ballot proposals: 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is non-controversial. It just digitizes the city maps for zoning purposes. Believe it or not, there are 8 different official maps that are used right now, and it's a very dated system. So there's digitizing a city map.
Explains a lot. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Super easy. 5. Now the other 3, 2 through, forget 1. It's an all state issue, and 6 is a charter revision that the state would have to get involved in later on term limits. Which, if that does pass, the city and state could actually, whoever the next mayor is, they may actually be able to serve 10 or 11 years as mayor because of a quirk in when they get elected. So this election could really matter for a whole bunch of reasons. All that aside, 2 through 4 expedite the ULURP process, and they created an e-ULURP, an expedited ULURP process. ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review process, takes 7 months right now. The idea is to reduce that amount of time. The local city council member, we have a custom called local council member deference, meaning if I'm the local council member and I don't like the project, the city council will defer to my opinion and kill it when it gets to the city council. This would eliminate city council member deference and would kick the process to a new board outside of the city council for expedited review and approval. The city council speaker and others on the council are very much against this. And if you follow me on Twitter X, I say every day, annoy the city council, vote for affordable housing. Like, this city has an affordable housing crisis right now. The city of Yes was a fantastic, we've talked about this. No, we did an event on this. The city of Yes was an amazing step to get more housing built in this city. But now the process to build that housing, this would tackle with these ballot proposals by moving that process along much faster. It would reduce the power of certain members of the city council, so they don't like that. But if affordability, which is how Mamdani got the Democratic nomination in the first place in June, if affordability is the number one issue in the city, then expediting a process to build more affordable housing and housing in general is certainly worthy of consideration. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of people coming out now strongly supportive. Teresa's right, Mamdani hasn't yet, because a lot of his supporters are against the some of these ballot proposals. This also sort of puts NIMBYism versus YIMBYism and this idea of how do we solve the affordable housing crisis in New York. And so these are really important ballot proposals, and I hope you'll vote yes on all of them.
All right, that's really helpful. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Teresa, for bringing that up. Teresa, I want to come right back to you. Pricing and market psychology. If you're valuing or listing a property today, do you have to price in the possibility? Is there an intangible uncertainty that's just clouding over us? Are you seeing any sellers or buyers changing behavior because of this election?
I mean, I think there's definitely uncertainty, a cloud of uncertainty locally in the country and around the world right now. But I don't think that it's actually affecting fundamentals in New York City for people who are listing their properties. It's just too speculative for our city at this point. I think we're focusing on the fundamentals. I assume everybody on this call is still looking at market data when they are choosing to list a property. I don't think any seller is saying, you know what, Mamdani might get elected. We should reduce the price that I'm going to list my apartment at. So I don't think we've seen it a lot on the sell side. On the buy side, it's a little more mixed. I think most end users are focused on lifestyle, long-term value. They want to live in New York. That's why they're here, not because the space comes at such a great value. So if we're seeing that anywhere with like end user buyers, I think it's when they're trying to use it as leverage to put in a low offer. Investors are a little different. I think they're the ones who could be most impacted by the outcomes of this election. I think investors are taking a pause to see where policy might land, whether we're talking about taxes or rent regulation or development incentives. Anytime you've got talk of rent regulation or new affordability mandates, it's going to add another layer of uncertainty. Again, like I said, ultimately it's investors and owners with large portfolios that I think the new policy could impact the most. But for everybody else, I think it's really more media narrative than any actual market shift that we're seeing now, and the fundamentals of limited supply and steady demand that we continue to see haven't really changed.
Great answer. And I mean, I guess like September was actually active. September,
yeah, it's like 7% higher than last year, right?
September saw about 400 more listings come on the market than typical for September. And we actually had the first month of higher than average contract volume since December of last year. And I wouldn't have expected that, because usually before the event, uncertainty rises and peaks right before the event, right? Because you get headlines, you get the drama, you get the emotions. It's like last year, right? Remember last year, the national election, right? Everyone kind of just was, what, I want to wait. I'm gonna wait. Let's see what's happening. I'm gonna wait. And then the election happened. And even though it may or may not have went the way you want them to, decisions got made afterwards. So it's interesting. I would have thought that activity would have been down in September in anticipation of this, but the reverse happened. So you never know. And the city's alive. I mean, I was just on a webinar with Phil Horrigan and a great group of agents, and 80%, 20%, 80% of them were saying, guys, it's like a nothing burger. But yeah, it's there, everyone's out there, but it's not impacting the market that much. And then 20%, it's like, you know what? I've lost deals because of this. I've actually seen buyers walk away. So it's hard to get a read on it, but Thank you for your
So
answer.
no, it's definitely not a nothing burger, but the fat on the burger will not be known on November 5th if Mamdani wins, and
Right.
that's because we don't yet know who is going to be, for example, who's the next police commissioner,
Right.
who's running EDC, who's running New York City public school systems. You know, one out of every 335 living Americans today, anywhere in the country, is a student in the New York City public school system. That's how big it is. It's bigger than most cities in the country, just the school system. The enormity of New York City's public system is so vast, it's hard to comprehend. And we won't know who he's going to appoint because he hasn't said. And so a lot will depend on how this goes, and if he wants to be a successful mayor, one would assume that there'd be some position modulation, or if he's going to hold true to certain dogmas, he probably won't be a successful mayor. And then so I think this idea of clarity on November 5th, I think is if
Right.
should he win, I think is not actually the case. This is more of an evolving situation. Now, luckily, he's sworn in January 1st, so over the 6 weeks after, we'd get more information on who these new leaders of the city are going to be. And then at that point, I think there may be more of an ability to make an educated decision, like, oh, this will be okay. It's going to be all right.
So fall market might still be a little iffy, even though we had a nice start to it. I mean, it's only 1 month and it was a little bit, but hey, I'll take anything at this point. But spring market's really our next target, really to get after the event, it sounds like.
I think so.
But by the way, is it normal for them not to name appointees and positions before, or is this like typical that they go
No,
into?
well, usually by this point in time, the election, if you're the Democratic nominee, you're simply
win.
working in your transition because there's no general. The Republican Party is down to 512,000 registered Republicans in New York City. They're a minor party. Independents now outvote Republicans 2-to-1 ratio in the city of New York. So there's no real general. We haven't had a real contested general election in New York since 2009, if you want to get, because Bill Thompson versus the Bloomberg, if you want to get close, but that wasn't even that close. So it's been a while. So you would usually be working on transition, but now because it's competitive, should you start announcing positions, it would look like you're getting ahead of yourself.
Interesting. Jared, rental relief and affordability. That's the topic of this question. With rents near record highs, what realistic levers does a Mamdani administration have to provide rental relief? And more broadly, could progressive policies actually encourage new development, or will they tighten supply even further?
Well, we touched on this a little bit in terms of the rent guideline boards and, his ability to appoint and ultimately get that rent freeze. I mean, he could get rid of the Fair Act. We have seen the direct correlation that has had with, raising the rents, albeit, reducing the cost to get in, but over someone's total cost of tenancy, it has been inflated. And I do see Mamdani speaking quite directly about building about 200,000 affordable units. And my stance has been that it doesn't appear as if the city has tackled the root of the issue head on, which comes down to supply. We've tried to legislate who pays what, when, where, why, and how. We've tried all these other ways, but actually just building more affordable housing that's the root of the issue. So there is something in that if we are able to create incentives for developers, whether that's an expanded 421A or something that's coming back that allows us to build, that's one way that will speak to, being able to solve it. So I do respect the fact that he's trying to actually hit that nail on the head, while it seems that other leaders of late have tried to come at it from any other way but head on.
Interesting. All right, Teresa, I'm gonna have to keep you on hold for 1 sec because this pivots right to a question I have for Jason with growth and capital flow. Jason, who's going to build in a Mamdani in New York, and can the city still attract capital and developers under a more progressive agenda?
Yeah, so remember, he is looking at Bill de Blasio as a model here. Remember, we did have a rent freeze under de Blasio, and de Blasio was willing to trade density for affordability. And so upzoning was something that was popular during the de Blasio administration. It's highly likely that where the real estate industry finds common cause with a potential Mamdani administration would be on upzoning. So you have more affordability, you have more density than would otherwise previously be allowed. So that's one place where there may be common ground with the administration. What other things he could do? There's actually a lot that he could do. Yes, the rent guidelines board people that you appoint are independent people, but let's face it, there's going to be a litmus test on them. They're going to vote the way the mayor wants, and if he wants a rent freeze, he's going to get his rent freeze at some point there. But there are also, we don't talk about this enough. There are over 50,000 rent stabilized units in the city right now that are empty, that the economics of, because of HSTPA, the 2019 rent laws, don't make any sense anymore for those owners to rent out those units at a loss and renovate those units at a loss. So they just sit empty. And so there are ways that we can get those units back online. I propose one, which was to allow those landlords to accept tenants with Section 8 vouchers at the Section 8 voucher cap instead of the rent stabilized cap. Believe it or not, the Section 8 voucher cap in much of the city is now higher than the rent stabilized level. So if you allow landlords to use the full amount of the voucher, which by the way is federal money, so instead of like spending New York City taxpayer dollars on a bridge to nowhere in Connecticut, we could use it here in New York. So much better use of funds. So that's one thing you could do to help get those units back online. Andrew Cuomo talked yesterday actually about the rent stabilized units and finding ways to get them back on. That's 50,000 units. It's probably a lot higher than that, but it's at least 50,000 documented units right there. That would go a long way to easing the supply crisis that we have right now.
Hmm. Jared, real quick, do you have anything to chime in on bringing capital and developers back in?
I mean, there needs to be some sort of incentive. I mean, the cost of acquisition is just so high, which is why they're set up to build luxury properties, right? If it costs them 1,200 a foot or thereabouts to acquire, and then you got to build in, the money they got to repay, every layer of lenders that they're having, it's just not feasible to acquire, developable product. And, you look at some of the, office space, and they either have too large of a footprint for you to be able to effectively subdivide, or the loss factor becomes too large. So there needs to be some sort of then tax incentive that makes it feasible for the developer to come in and do it.
Right. Teresa, thank you for being so patient. I'm going to come back to you. I want to talk about tactical shift in messaging and mindset. I want to start to take some of these things, some of these structural elements of the election and the power and all that kind of stuff we talked about, and now translate it back into conversations. When uncertainty dominates headlines, what's the right tone for agents to strike? Caution, optimism, or education? Is this the moment to shift from urgency to advisory and lean into data-driven guidance?
Yes. I think with, I brought it up before. I think we are living in very uncertain times. I think emotions are running high, anxiety is running high. And I think it's really important that we come in with a calm, steady hand. We've been coaching our agents to shift from a sense of urgency to more of that sense of advisory. Just really educating, being the calm, steady voice. You want them to feel informed. You don't want clients to feel sold right now. I think a lot of, I think data is the right answer, right? We talk about fear is the lack of knowledge. Well, let's talk about what we do know, right? Let's go down to the fundamentals. We can talk about inventory levels. We can talk about interest rates. We can talk about buyer and seller psychology right now. I think you want to really use data as a trust builder. Clients are going to come in talking about, what about the election? What does this mean? Let's just shift them back to the fundamentals, the data, and remind them what New York City is.
Yeah, the city's on fire right now. Jason, let's say you have a very different political view of your client.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Usually with humor and a smile.
Big smile.
What I find is that people can take differing opinions, but they can't take attitude. And it's obviously good to just avoid whenever you can, because you never want to rub people the wrong way. But look, I have worked with some people on the very, very opposite ends of the political spectrum with me. And, they've looked me up, and I've always had fun with it. And in 17 years of doing this, never once has it been a problem. or cost me a client. But mostly that's because I know how to handle it. And there's a way to do it, and there's a way like not to do it. And the way I do it, I actually find it, particularly with the clients that don't agree with me, we actually get along better as a result. First, this isn't like maybe like a real estate skill, but it's helpful to be able to handle yourself in debate on point of fact. And then also to pivot it to something where you can find commonality as quickly as possible and to make a joke as soon as you can. And usually it diffuses anything. And then, I've had people, oh, this is my liberal commie broker, Jason Haber, and although these days now people accuse me of being a Republican, so I have no idea what the hell I am anymore, to be honest. I don't even know. So like the world's upside down.
Okay, so
So
tone it down. Look up a couple jokes if you don't know any. You know?
yeah, I just do me, and I find that it works out okay usually.
Focus on the market. Be an expert advisor. I think it's all right. Um, Jared, does the mayor really matter? It's all just. Does it matter at all? What's going on here? At the end of the day, how much does City Hall matter for real estate versus macro forces like interest rates, credit conditions, capital flows, and stuff like that?
So it matters from a feeling, right? And this is I agree with everything Teresa said in terms of how to use, data, give the right context and then the right strategy with each client that you're talking to. Because if you can build a confident client is going to make an educated, decision. Feeling has some place in that equation. But again, so where does the mayor come in? The mayor comes in because people are going to have certain preconceived beliefs or notions about it. So they need to feel comfortable and feel confident in the direction that the city is going to be able to want to invest. Now, to Teresa's point, we have some people that are New Yorkers through and through, and they're here no matter what. But there are other people that are going to only come here if they believe that it's going to be welcoming to them, right? Take that however you want it. So a couple important things to know. One is we've survived arguably worse mayors, and New York has been on a good trajectory period, right? We've had 10 years almost now of sort of this price flattening, but I firmly believe we're on this precipice of this next sort of rise and recovery because we move kind of counter-cyclical to the national market. So to me, the mayor is important, but the mayor is more important arguably from the police force, from crime, from quality of life, to some extent, yes, the Department of Education, from some extent in terms of how we can redevelop and build. But we've been on a good redevelopment tear, not necessarily an affordable housing redevelopment tear, but you look at how the Midtown East Corridor, you look at what's gone on with Hudson Yards and some other stuff, there has been some good things happening. The city feels alive again. People are back, tourists are back. So it matters, but I would argue it matters more in the perception than the actual. We're going to have a very interesting election next year when it comes to the governor, and that's going to be more important. And that's also going to play into either be an accelerant or a limiting factor in what the next mayor of New York City can do.
This is interesting, very interesting stuff. Thank you, Jared. I already see some questions coming in here, guys. Reminder, you could put questions in the chat. I got 2 questions left on my list, and then we're going to go to the speed round. But if you guys have questions that was not talked about just yet, I know there's a lot of overlap in these questions. Put it in the chat. I will do my best to get to it. My last 2 questions. Okay, my last 2 questions. Teresa, I want to come back to you. Okay, the Bullish case for New York City. I think this is a good question to go over even without the mayoral election. But what is the strongest Bullish case for New York right now? How do we remind clients and ourselves that New York City's long-term story will endure?
Well, I think we've come up against much bigger hurdles than who our mayor is, right? New York comes down to resilience and relevance. We are constantly reinventing ourselves. We've been through some really challenging times. 9/11, the financial crisis, the pandemic. Every time people said, what about New York? What's going to happen to New York? This is the end of New York, which is just ridiculous. We've always come back stronger and more desirable than ever. I think the fundamentals haven't changed. We're a place with limited land, constrained supply, constant global demand, and a steady influx of talent and capital. As I said before, people don't come to New York because there's a lot of space here and they're getting a good value for their dollar. It's the proximity to opportunity, whether you're in finance, education, the arts, tech. It's the place where people want to be. These kind of political things are temporary. We've in the last 100 years of modern real estate, I think we've survived 12 different mayors. So, whatever happens here, New York's long-term value is structural. It's not tied to any particular mayor.
I would also, there's a lot of questions in the chat, so I think it's worth just
Yeah.
making sure that everyone is clear. When we talk about a rent freeze, or when we talk about what the rent guideline boards oversee, it's the rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments, which do, in the aggregate of our inventory, make up a large percentage of the total floor rent housing stock. But when we talk about our clients buying a condo, for instance, that's free market. That's not touched. There's no, rent control. There's no rent stabilization. There's no rent freeze for those. That's market dependent. Some buildings, if they're buying mixed income, they may have some rent stabilized units in there as a holdover, or some rent controlled from decades ago, and that would be effective. But anything that is free market, it doesn't mean that he's telling landlords of individual owned, not subject to rent control or rent stabilization, that they wouldn't be able to charge whatever they or the market would bear. And I think that's an important distinction.
In fact, Jared, what I've been arguing is that the very people that he plans to help are actually hurt the most by these policies. Then it will make the city actually more unaffordable. And so to a question like what Brent asked about people who want to buy investment properties in the city, what's the implication? I actually just had that, and I said, listen, if he wins, free market rents are going to go up. A constraint of supply drives up rents, not down on the free market. So if you're looking to buy for investment, rents will go up from here. The city will become more unaffordable, and for renters will be squeezed the most. Free market renters will be squeezed the most out of that. So you could actually look at it like this might be a great time to buy an investment property in New York, because you have negotiability on price on the buy side, and then you have power on the rental side as a landlord. And that looks like it will be increasing over time. If some of his policies go through, will drive up, not drive down free market rents.
Yeah, if you could take advantage of the rental market, because the rental market is the hot one, right? I mean, the sales market's the sales market hasn't done anything. The sales market is just sitting there for a decade, and one could argue that the rent regs of 2019 put in place the situation right now with the rental market. I mean, you touched on that. You touched on that before. This is 6 years in the works, guys. That doesn't change so quick. If the rental market's going to keep doing what it's been doing, it right. It's been going up for the last God knows how long. Yeah, that's an interesting investment thesis there.
We just closed with a client at One Manhattan Square last week. They have, there's a tax abatement on the property, which doesn't even exist anymore. So they bought in. They were negotiable on the price and the closing costs. So they got in a low basis. And now they get to take advantage of the rise in the rental market. So it's like a win on both sides.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. And there's a lot of value out there right now in the sales market, especially for unrenovated properties with temporary high carry and stuff like that. There's some sellers getting some serious pain, which might translate to value on the other side. Interesting stuff. Jason, while I have you here really quick, long-term political impact, guys, long-term political impact, zooming out, what are the potential long-term ripple effects that this election could have on New York City real estate from this investor sentiment to valuation trends? You kind of touched on it.
Look, the mayor of New York is an extraordinarily powerful person. They have a municipal government bigger than almost every state. They have a budget that's bigger than most nations. It's an enormous, you can do enormous good or enormous damage. Now, there are checks and balances along the way. We don't know yet, for example, who will be the city council speaker. Will it be Julie Menon from the Upper East Side? City council speaker controls the agenda in the city council. So that would stop some legislation from reaching his desk and getting some of his things through and approved. What will happen, like Jared touched on, what will happen when the governor's race of next year? We don't know. The governor, that's in June, by the way. It's a June primary and then November election. To raise taxes, he needs the help of Albany, and the Governor Hochul has at least made clear now that she has no interest in raising taxes. What I talk to people about mostly is what he wants to do with corporate taxes. He wants to raise corporate taxes from 7.25 to 11.5% because that's what they are in New Jersey. Now, I don't know why we're comparing ourselves to anything in New Jersey unless it's Bruce Springsteen. But to be clear, 7.25 to 11.5 is not 4%. It's 58% of an increase. Okay, so its corporate tax rate is 58%. So I say to people like, who does that hurt? That hurts like the mom and pops, the small business owners who have to pass along that cost to the customer. And what does that do? It makes New York more unaffordable, or they close. So it's this. It's again, it's small business getting hurt. I think a lot of his proposals end up hurting the smaller business and working class New Yorkers more than anyone else. And I don't think that point has come through in the campaign as much as I would have liked to have seen. But to answer your question directly, it is a very powerful position, and there are significant implications for public safety, for mental health, for education, and on and on and on that the mayor can control. So the stakes are high.
Which
And I
ultimately
think,
ripples down to the investor market and the buyer market, et cetera. Go ahead, Jared.
but the phrase that I want to leave in our minds and piggybacking on Jason is unintended consequences, right? So the Fair Act, again, to use that, the initiative or the desire to be able to make it easier for renters to move and to pay less money to get in, great, that's noble. But again, it didn't take a genius to see what the full effect is Jason's describing here. So I think that's the most important things, is that things that are on the surface to make the city affordable, something that we would all love to be able to do. When you actually say, how are we going to do it? It breaks, or it has at worst, then the opposite effect, which is really important.
Yeah, good point. Excellent, guys. Excellent. That concludes the first half. It went a little bit over. I apologize, but guys, we have 20 minutes. We have 20 minutes left, 18 minutes, or so to be exact. I have a bunch of questions here. Speed round. Speed round is like 60 seconds or less, guys. If you go to 60 seconds, I'm going to cut you off, kind of a thing. I want to try to get to as many questions here as possible. You in the audience, if you have a question that has not been addressed, I already see a bunch of questions still on the 2, 3, 4 proposition clarity. We will try to get that towards the end, even though we covered it. Put the questions in now. All right. This is going to be a free for all, guys. Here's the first one. Is now a good time to buy or sell, or should clients wait until after the election?
I mean, I think it's a
Go
great
ahead.
time
It's a
to
great
buy.
time
And if
to
you don't
buy.
need to sell today, then you should wait for 6 to 12 months to sell. Which
Till spring
my advice,
season.
what?
Spring season, basically.
Spring or next fall, which again, if I'm giving disproportionate advice, then that should mean that the market is going to go up or get more competitive. So that's again why buyers are going to get that first mover advantage. And if I believe prices are going to firm up and increase, then sellers can benefit on the back half of that.
Teresa, you were saying?
It's a great buy. It's a great time to buy. I think,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
buyer's market.
yeah, for sure.
Okay. How long after the election might the dust settle and confidence, if it was eroded, return?
Goes back to what Jason was saying, right? We've got to wait and see what happens.
See when the appointees are, but early in January we'll know
early
the
January.
cabinet who's going to be in the key positions.
Okay. Could there be new restrictions on condo or co-op rent renewals?
I mean, anything is possible.
Did I stump the group?
I mean, that would be an Albany thing, not New York City. But I suppose anything could be on the table these days.
Okay.
I don't think so though. You mean
is more
good clause? I don't know what they're referring to, like good clause eviction, or I'm not sure.
It doesn't say that here. I don't know either. Who is more favorable to the real estate industry and why? Out of the candidates.
Go ahead, Jason.
Tough one.
I mean, Andrew Cuomo is obviously, first of all, Andrew Cuomo was the HUD director, so he's built housing, and also as governor, he's built large projects. Not to get into like a history lesson right now, but the best builder of the economic strength of New York ever was the only person who served as both its governor and its mayor, and that was a guy named DeWitt Clinton, who built the Erie Canal, which some of you see my lecture on this, was the most important public work project in the history of New York. So there is history for people having these positions having success, and I think as driving economics that the governor would be best equipped to help our industry and help to solve the affordability crisis. My opinion.
Okay. Opinions are welcome. Could Mamdani's platform of rent control and taxation realistically pass city council?
Well, it doesn't have to pass a city council. So it's the state. You need taxation's the state. So and rent freeze is the rent guidelines board, like Jared said earlier. So It's not really the council.
Okay. Anyone else on that topic? No.
Well,
Okay.
Jason.
Are people or businesses already leaving New York City because of political uncertainty?
We're not seeing it in the numbers. I mean, I think
No.
those that already wanted to leave left for one of the things that happened in the last 7 years, in New York. So, and we're arguably starting to see some of the South Florida trade back to New York as, the true cost of living down there when you factor in insurance and employment, all this other stuff, isn't what it's cracked up to be. I would also say, and I'll keep it under 60 seconds, a mild recession can bode well for New York City, because if it continues to shift the balance between employees and back to employers, it'll move people back into the office and move people back to employment centers, nationally, like New York. So this is part of the countercyclicalness of this market that I think there's a confluence of factors that are coming to sort of buoy the market for the rest of this decade.
Excellent. How can agents help clients separate election noise from true policy impact?
Having honest, intelligent, frank conversations with your clients where you're, as Teresa said, you're sitting down with them, you're aligning with them as an advisor, you're giving them the facts, and you're empathizing with how they may be feeling about it. But again, if they want to be in New York City for a long or extended period of time, then let's ground in historically what has happened, what's happening now, and to the best of our ability, what do we think can happen in the near term, and give them all the facts to make their educated decision.
They say that campaigning is poetry, but governing is prose. And it's much different to govern than to campaign. And it's very true. And what you get done and how you do it in a democracy, particularly in the chaotic one like in New York, it's not always going to match the campaign rhetoric.
Okay. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What should we be watching most closely on election night and in the weeks to follow to gauge any potential impact on real estate?
It's not, the results will be known by like 9:15, 9:30. I mean, like it's not like the national election where like you're waiting for like California to report, or like the West Coast to close, or like a Midwest swing state to come in. Well, you'll know unless it's like, within a few thousand votes, we're gonna know that night, and we're gonna know early that night either way, I would presume. So, listen, what I would look for real estate is, does a candidate eke by, or does a candidate have a mandate? The bigger the win, the bigger the mandate, and that could impact their decision making and the how far they want to push their own particular agenda.
And what happens with those proposals, right? Like, I think
and the
that'll
ballot
be
proposals.
a sign of what's to come.
Okay. And me and Johnny Charts are going to look at the ticker, and we're going to look at liquidity and deal activity and contract activity after the election. And we're going to be all over telling you guys whether or not that's ticking up or ticking down afterwards. So we'll follow that on that level right there. Is it possible that his policies could have some positive outcomes for affordability and migration?
By his, do you mean Mamdani?
Yes. Let's assume Mamdani wins. Yes.
Just
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, upzoning. I think we would find common cause with upzoning, and I think as a affordability fix potentially.
Okay. Do you think Curtis will drop out?
So I actually propose that he drops out tonight at the debate. I pitched the people on. I don't think anyone listened to me though. It would be like a big deal, like mic drop
as one of the questions.
And just walk off. But I mean, right now he's all in, so we'll see. It's actually a legal at this point. It's a fuzzy legal question. Not to get into the weeds on the campaign finance board, but because he took matching funds, he can't drop out without giving them back. So like even if he dropped out, he would probably do it in a way that like he kind of like still campaign, but campaign for others. Otherwise, he has to return a lot of money because he got a lot of matching funds. So it's tricky. How, if he does it, have the actual mechanics of how he does it too, it's not quite as easy as you'd think because of the matching funds program. So I don't know, but either way, he's on the ballot. Jim Walden's on the ball, and Eric Adams is unfortunately on the ballot as well, even though they've dropped out.
Okay. I'm just going to read this question. So if we will get other nationalities or pools of buyers buying here investments, what would you tell investors fearing from higher taxes, less profit, or freeze rents in both commercial and residential, fearing to take risks? What would you say to these investors?
I mean, I think we addressed this earlier. I think you arbitrage the market for your advantage right now, but
the rent side and then the future sale. Okay. Yeah. Tap into the rental market and until the sales market reawakens, kind of a thing. Because the sales market's been dead for 10 years.
No, but buying now, you get the lower price.
Right.
You have the advantage of negotiability, but then also you have the advantage of the strong rental market too. So you can take advantage on both sides, which is why it's a good time to be an investor.
Okay. I think we're done with all the questions, guys. Everything here is repetitive. We've gone over it. I mean, the only other question I have right here is just to, again, could you please clarify propositions 2, 3, 4? It was.
Oh yeah, you want me to do that
with the
quickly?
comment. Go ahead. Yeah.
So just real quick. So 2, 3, 4 on the ballot. So 2 streamlines the approval process. So it bypasses parts of the ULERP process that go through the city council. So basically it eliminates member deference. So if one member objects, the local member objects, the whole project doesn't die and go away. Number 3 is Prop 3 is expedited review for small projects. So we have ULERP, it creates e-ULERP, which is an expedited review. If I forget what the size is, but for a smaller process, it reduces the time on it. And then last, there's the Affordable Housing Appeals Board, and it sets up a 3-member appeals board. It's the mayor, the borough president of that borough, and the city council speaker to overturn council rejections on qualified affordable housing. So it checks off member deference. Sorry about my dog there. And it weakens the council's ability to veto projects in their district.
Okay, so from a real estate perspective, it sounds like the real estate industry would be benefited a little better if it was yes, yes, yes on those.
Yeah, so REBNY is very much supporting all those ballot props for affordability, as is the American Real Estate Association. And so I think it's important that we as a community get out there and support these ballot props.
Okay. Guys, I mean, I just want to give you an opportunity. Does any of you guys want to say a final note? Because I don't know if you have thoughts in your minds that you want to get out. If you don't, you can remain quiet and we can let you go. But is there anything you want to say to these agents that are having trouble having conversations with their clients to help them have these more confident, more digestible, and more effective conversations?
Focus on the fundamentals and don't try to sell. Try to educate and advise.
Yeah,
Love it.
I'd rather win the client or keep the client and lose the deal.
Yeah.
So it's relationships over the transaction. And that's the most important thing, because if you build trust and being able to show your work and be able to walk through to the clients, if you can align yourself as that advisor and earn their trust and say, look, if you don't feel comfortable or confident, you may pay more later, but that's okay. But if you don't feel comfortable or confident today and you want to defer, that's fine. It's your decision. So you're not putting any pressure. And that's the only way that you're going to set yourself apart and be able to win, and create a long-standing and really good business over the long term.
All of that, and not only vote, get 5 of your friends to vote too. Early voting starts October 25th. Election day is November 4. Polls are open till 9 p.m.
Awesome. All right. Well, guys, this has been great. Thank you guys for helping us out. I hope this was educational. I hope you guys got a couple of actionable takeaways. I also hope that you guys might take a minute and email Jason, Jared, and Teresa and thank them and start a relationship with them. These are 3 great people, great minds. I love them. I often have them back on our content and events. And it's all about education and intelligence and being good at what we do. So thank you guys for taking time to be here. Jason Haber of Compass, Jared Antin, Brown Harris Stevens, and Teresa Stephenson of Platinum. You guys are the best. Thank you, everybody. Good luck. Goodbye. Have a good one. And I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks when this is all over and the dust is settling.
Thanks,
Cheers,
everybody.